Now, from the studios of Into Tomorrow in Miami, this is ITTV.
Throughout 2021, businesses had been challenged, of course, to meet the needs of their customers while still finding ways to be more cost efficient, more responsive, and make faster, more informed decisions. We've talked about that for many, many months. Many businesses turn to artificial intelligence, or AI, to address these shifts. We're joined by the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer. Yes, that's actually his title with IBM, Seth Dobrin. Seth, welcome into Tomorrow. How are you, sir?
Doing well, Dave. Thanks for having me.
It's a pleasure to have you. First of all, when we saw your title, we said, we got to have him on. That's perfect for Into Tomorrow. That's exactly the kind of stuff that we talk about. Tell me, what is it that you do at IBM as Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer?
Yeah, so my role is multifold. So first and foremost, I'm responsible for establishing and implementing our AI strategy. So how we come to market with AI, what we invest in AI, and how IBM across the company shows up as a singular company around AI. I'm also responsible for our internal transformation for how we use data and AI within our software business. And I'm responsible for implementation of data privacy regulations and compliance with those, as well as the upcoming AI regulations. Plus, I spend a lot of time talking to customers, sharing my experiences and perspectives on AI.
Terrific. And of course, talking to folks like me to get more of a perspective as well.
Of course.
Now, I understand on your site that banks will be adopting new AI-powered fraud detection capabilities. Sorry, the throat's going on me. 'Tis the season. What can you share about that?
Yeah, so I mean, banks have historically been leaders in the implementation and adoption of AI. It was primarily or initially driven by regulatory requirements around anti-money laundering as well as around fraud. Traditionally, fraud detection has been managed through a series of rules. So if this happens, then, if Dave does this, then that means it's likely fraud or not, which is not really reliable because there are things that change about you that don't necessarily follow the rules. Rules need to be updated. AI has been used to reduce what we call the rate of false positives, which means, you're driving across country, you stop at a gas station, you put your card in to pump the gas, and the bank says, sorry, transactions declined. You get a text or an email asking if it's you. That's what we would call a false positive because it's you using your credit card.
Yeah.
And so AI through location services on the app, as well as understanding your history and perspectives, can reduce those types of false positives.
And we hear from so many companies lately about how they use AI and they're not doing very much, but what you're describing makes perfect sense. I mean, it's actual case studies and history and actual use of these things. So, and of course, not only banking, but retailers in general, I think, in order especially to deal with overcoming the pandemic, if we're ever going to get back to whatever normal is. But retailers are also seeing some terrific advantages to artificial intelligence in the real world.
Yeah, so there's multiple ways that retailers specifically are using AI. One, and probably the one that we're probably most used to, whether we realize it or not, is what we call hyper-personalization, which is where AI is used to understand you as an individual, your likes, your dislikes, your habits, so that the retailers can provide a better and more customized experience for you. AI also helps retailers managing the world we live in, where it's kind of a hybrid digital, real, in-person, brick and mortar relationship we have with the retailers. And so AI is a fundamental part of that process, as well as, retailers, particularly along with travel and transportation, are facing a staffing crisis, right? They're on these massive hiring sprees trying to bring people on. AI is a fundamental part of that. Now, that's an area where it affects a human's wealth and well-being, and so we need to make sure that that's done in a trustworthy manner when we look at those types of use cases.
And Seth, on your website at ibm.com/AI, we're seeing a lot of very cool information, very helpful information. One of the things that we've noticed is conversational AI and how it'll help healthcare and insurance companies and so forth. What exactly is conversational AI?
Yeah, so conversational AI takes advantage of a capability that's known as natural language processing, natural language understanding, and even natural language generation, which is basically where the AI has learned to understand language, understand the context of that language, and be able to respond. And so a great example of this that all of us can relate to is with CVS Health. They were an instrumental part of the vaccine rollout across the United States. And interestingly, not surprisingly maybe, there were varying requirements state to state on who was eligible, sometimes even county to county. And CVS used Watson Assistant, which is our conversational AI capability, along with Watson Discovery, which is our natural language understanding capability, to be able to help us as humans get access to the vaccine, to information, and even using AI-powered automation to make appointments and ensure that the pharmacies that you were going to get your shot had adequate supplies.
So it made a huge difference, and thus the conversational AI played that important role. No question about that, especially because it becomes a language easy for us as consumers to understand. It's a whole different ballgame from the business end and from the businesses, enterprise that you work with, and that sort of thing. And you talk about IBM Watson. Almost every IBM guest I've interviewed over our past 26 years, I've asked to interview Watson one of these days. So maybe you'll be the one that says, we'll make that happen. I'm sure there's a way to do that because of AI. So we'll get Watson on into tomorrow at some point. But let's talk for a moment about how AI plays a role in the lives of us as consumers and businesses for that matter, because people say, well, we keep hearing a lot about it, but I'm not sure it's really affecting me. And if it is, how?
Yeah, so AI impacts us every day, almost every moment of every day. So whether we realize it or not. So for instance, I wear hearing aids, right? These hearing aids have a tremendous amount of AI in them, understanding the environment, analyzing the environment, and they even do things like translate language and transcribe. So that's one way that AI is impacting us. Other ways are in retail, like I mentioned. In financial decisions. So banks leverage AI pretty extensively to help them make decisions about credit card applicants, about mortgage applicants, things like that. And they do that for a couple of reasons. One is in order to help them resolve higher loads, demands, but also because AI can help them minimize biases that humans may bring to the table. It's important to remember that AI itself is not biased. Math is not biased. The bias comes from the past decisions of humans that live in the data. And so we're using AI to actually combat that and ensure that AI that impacts our health, our wealth, and our well-being minimizes specific types of biases.
Are there particular industries, Seth, that you think will benefit more than others from AI? I know that it can affect everyone and can certainly help every business in one way or another, but any in particular that you think are really going to be able to take advantage?
I think, as you mentioned, like literally every industry, every interaction could benefit from AI in some way. But I suspect that, as we look into 2022 specifically, as retail and travel and transportation are recovering from the pandemic, they were probably the hardest hit segments of the economy that were hit. They're leveraging AI, as I mentioned earlier, to help them with hiring and staffing up. They're leveraging AI to help make their supply chains more resilient. They're leveraging AI to make sure that their environmental footprint is more sustainable. And so those are some really good examples of how AI is impacting will be impacting us next year.
Well, Seth, you are very informative and a pleasure to chat with because we do learn a lot. I look forward to hopefully getting you back on the show again. There's so much more to cover. We barely were able to scratch the surface. Meantime, I'm assuming that our audience can visit ibm.com/AI and learn even more, especially about the things that you and your team are working on.
Yeah, and they can see, we've had over 40,000 customer engagements that leverage Watson, and many of those impact your listeners and your viewers on a daily basis through the companies that we work with. So if you want to learn more about some of those and how IBM may be touching you every day, go to ibm.com/Watson or /AI.
Terrific. Thank you, Seth. We appreciate you joining us. Seth Dobrin is the Chief Artificial Intelligence Officer, definitely one of the most interesting titles we've had lately on the program for IBM. And visit ibm.com/Watson or /AI. We'll get you there when you visit us at intotomorrow.com. I'm Dave Graveline. Don't go away. More to come as Into Tomorrow continues right here on the Advanced Media Network.